welcome to another episode of the Beyond the Device podcast, where we explore the life-defining moments that shape careers within the medical device industry. We are particularly interested in understanding how someone's personal experiences, challenges, or pivotal events influence their professional journey. And as we progress through the conversation, we will eventually land on the question, what is the one defining moment or experience that changed everything and set you on the path that you're onto today? Today's guest is someone that's spent over 2 decades working in the medical device and life sciences world, working across anything from product development, manufacturing, through to quality, regulatory, and commercialization. He's held senior leadership roles across a number of MedTech companies, helping scale technologies and build operations as businesses move from early development into real-world impact. But as always, on Beyond the Device, this conversation isn't really about job titles and career moves, it's about the person behind them. The decisions, the challenges, and the moments that shape the path that they end up taking. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to Andrew Mullen. Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks. Delighted to be here.
Welcome, Andrew. And as Nathan alluded to there, an amazing career, but actually where we want to start is right at the beginning. So just tell us a bit about your early years growing up and what shaped you.
Sure. Well, I guess, I'm from a working class family. I'm the second of 4 sons that was born into a coal mining family. And I grew up in a community where everybody either worked in the coal mine industry or had retired from it. And it was, although it was a community, it was also very much an ecosystem. And I remember, from an early age, people seemed to be judged by how hard working they are. My dad and neighbours would talk about, refer to somebody as a grafter or a shirker. And looking back, I think, as young as we were, obviously we're all impressionable, I think that really started to give me the view that, if you didn't work hard, then you wouldn't be valued in that sort of atmosphere, in that community. And I think the other observation, it was really quite hierarchical. Everybody had a place and seemed to know where it was, and it was all relevant to what your work was. And the other thing that kind of sticks with me and has stuck with me through my career is how there was almost a suspicion of anyone wanting to change the position in that hierarchy. And within that community, within that influence, my grandfather, he was a colliery under manager, and in those days, sort of 30s through to the 70s when he retired, that was a position that he earned through graft, and he sort of retained through respect from his bosses and from his men. And I say men, cognizant that it was a male-only industry then, so please don't judge me on any comments I make when referring to that. And my dad was electrician in the mines, and him being an engineer really, again, that really had an impact on how I viewed the world and what I wanted to be.
So between you and your siblings, where were you? Were you the oldest, youngest, in the middle?
I was the second oldest.
Okay.
So I've got an elder brother 2 years older, so he kind of lived everything before I did. He went there first, tested the water, and I snuck under the radar.
He was the guinea pig.
Absolutely.
And what have your siblings all ended up doing?
My elder brother is so he's in sales in the building industry. The brother below me he passed away sadly a year ago, unexpectedly, and then my younger brother works for JCB. He's had pretty much a sustained career in the sort of health and safety side of JCB. Okay. So all very different roles.
Yeah, because it's almost like a childhood that was transitioning through generations, where going off to university was more of a thing, or going into industries and breaking the mold of like a family tree in a single industry. And the fact that you were perhaps all doing that at similar times, was there support from your parents in that?
Yeah, I know it's almost cliche, but I was the second born. I jokingly said slipped under the radar. I think there was an element of that because my older brother was, very much the academic star of the family, and obviously he was experiencing things the first time. So he went through school, went through his A levels, and was bound for university. And I felt there was probably a lot of pressure on him to do that, but much less pressure on me to do it. And yeah, I don't know if that meant I didn't take the academic world, education seriously, or whether it was less important to me, or whether he was just more gifted. But there was definitely, that was his star was, his North Star was going to be university and then big things. My parents always said growing up they didn't want their kids going into the coal mine industry. They wanted to break the mold, but
Okay.
very much changed as I came through, and that path was sort of mapped out for me. To follow my dad in there. I guess I I always wanted to do engineering, and I just it seemed that it was an expectation almost, that not quite nepotism, but you would follow your parents through certain roles if that's the path you wanted, and it was always expected I would go into coal mining like my dad did.
Mm. So what was the exposure at an early age within engineering as an interest that then took you on a slightly different path? Was it something that you excelled at in school? Was it seeing other jobs? Like,
No, it was my dad really. He was an engineer, and he was constantly fixing stuff. Cars, neighbors' cars, kids' bikes, toys, appliances, and I pretty much grew up at the side of him holding the toolbox and holding the spanner, fascinated by what he was doing because I wanted to make things work as well. And so I think that's the whole, engineering thing just seemed to be a calling from there because I just wanted to take stuff that was broken and make it work like he did. And when I reflect on this, to be honest, I don't know if it was the making it work or whether it was, the ability to serve others. Because, as I say, at an underage time, I remember being in the outdoor of a pub with him, and somebody brought a glass washer to him and said, "Oh, can you fix this? Because they're backing up in the kitchen." And I just thought it was amazing that he could provide that service. As I say, I used to think it was the technical side, but actually, I wonder in hindsight whether it was the the service it was providing, the good things it was able to do.
yeah, I think we're almost losing this now where you go and play in your garage with your dad or your granddad fixing things, taking things apart. Everyone's got an electric car now. It's all wired up to computer screens. It's not the same type of environment to start breaking things and putting things back together. But so many of the stories
Yeah.
we've heard, particularly on the medical device side, where they end up going down that engineering route, it has come from just playing around with things in a garage, in a shed, in a garden, with a parent at work, um, and maybe we're losing that.
I
Well,
think so,
we're
definitely.
the parents, Dunks,
We are the
and we're
parents,
not,
yeah.
and we're not in any garages fixing stuff. So that's probably on us.
Sit Oscar on your lap and teach him how to do
I
YouTube
think you're
videos or
right, though.
recruit.
Yeah.
I think you're right about the complexity because, as my kids got older and older, they went from bringing sort of clockwork things and battery things and say, "Dad, it's broken. Can you fix it?" to, turning up with a MacBook and saying it doesn't work, and I'm going,
Yeah,
"What can I do?" So there is, yeah. I think we are. You're absolutely right. We are losing that sort of direct contact with it.
yeah. And when you got to university, what did you study?
I didn't go to university. I
Okay.
actually, so my brother was going to university. So when I left school, it was sort of envisaged that I would get an apprenticeship and follow, as I go in the pits, get an apprenticeship. Around that time, the coal industry was grinding. We're talking mid to late 80s. The coal industry was grinding to a halt, and the job market really wasn't great. So I ended up following my dad into the pits, and really, my initial job was sort of working in a team, getting supplies from surface to coal face or from the bottom of the shaft to the coal face. It was real graft and dirty, really not what I envisaged or what my parents envisaged for me. And I think at some point somebody spotted either that work ethic that I feel I'd inherited or some potential, and recommending me for a role in the environmental department doing gas testing, ventilation, and that sort of thing. So a little bit more technical, but it wasn't what I wanted. And then I remember one day seeing I'm sure it was in a newspaper, an ad for Royal Navy engineering technicians, and there was a sort of a penny drop. It wasn't the pivotal moment. It was a pivotal moment where I thought, well, hang on, I could do that, and there's a whole different world of excitement. And so I joined the Navy, and I did my apprenticeship through the Navy.
Amazing. I have a very similar story. I think about it quite a lot, but I wanted to study architecture at university. which I eventually ended up doing, just on a very strange route to it. But transitioning from GCSEs to A levels and trying to do A level maths and physics, it was too much of a stretch for me. So I dropped out of my A levels very quickly. And with my then stepdad, he was a window fitter. So for about 3 months, I was just in the van with him, fitting windows, doors, conservatories. And someone that he worked with came in with the Beds on Sunday newspaper and said, there's an advert in there for like an apprentice in an architecture practice in Bedford. If he hadn't have brought that in and shown me that, I have no idea what my path would have been, because I went for that interview, I got that job. From that job, I worked there for 3 years. I went and studied a course in construction. That then got me into university, which is where I wanted to be. And then I didn't end up doing architecture anyway. But that that act of kindness, I guess, of just somebody showing me that advert completely changed the course I was on.
It's a kind of sliding doors moment, isn't it, from the movie? Because, and when I've worked more years than I'm ever likely to work now. And when I look back, so many points in time where it could have, you could have taken one door or the other and just completely defined, where you ended up. Yeah, it's an interesting point.
Mm.
Yeah, and that kind of leads us on nicely to the next section. And when you look back at your life, you look back at moments, key moments. Are there any standout, pivotal points that ultimately set you on the path that you're onto today?
I think we just talked about that wanting to be an engineer, wanting to fix things, and then the key moment that enabled that was that advert that we just talked about and got me into the Navy, and I had really good progress, and things happen in your life, got married, got kids, it was time to leave the Navy, and I was looking for roles, and there was a company that made industrial X-ray equipment who wanted to move into medical, and they were looking for someone with a specific technical skill set, related to the engineering, to the way X-rays and high energy is generated. And quite frankly, I took that role for the technical opportunity, and I thought it was going to be interesting. I was going to be able to really make a contribution to that company. The kind of pivotal moment that sort of, so again, we talk about decisions that put you in a certain place, but the place that I got to that really kind of brought converged all of those things together was, I was working as an engineer for this company in a radiotherapy department, quite local to where I am. And it was a broken down machine. And on that day, there was another company's machine had broken down. And it was just this really massive, chaotic scene with some very poorly, you can imagine that sort of environment, some very poorly, some pretty desperate in some cases people waiting for what was potentially life-changing treatment. And some of them were being queued up for other machines, so they're having to wait longer, standing around, wait. Other people were being sent home, and it was quite chaotic. Now, if I just come back to another moment in my time, when I was 12, I said I was second of four sons. My parents didn't have time for everybody. They were good parents. But the one of the people I had a really close relationship was the guy that lives next door. We called them uncle and auntie at the time. They didn't have kids, so I was essentially the son they didn't have, and they really took to me and had all the time in the world for me. And at 12 years old, he passed away from cancer, and I remember that that hit me and really stuck with me. And 2 years later, she passed away as well. So fast forward, many years, I'm sat in this radiotherapy department. And I honestly think that was the moment that I thought, well, I can connect these dots. I kind of related back to that, and I just felt the engineering's good. I can fix lots of things, but actually, I could do a lot more than it. And that, when we talk about the why, as we often do these days, that really provided the why. I can take everything that I've done so far, and I can potentially help these people and the situation they're in, and in turn do something to prevent what happened in the past.
And have those dots been connected since then, or did you connect them in the moment?
So I definitely recognized it in the moment, because I remember quite vividly thinking about, I'd been lucky in some respects not to have had too much experience with cancer and people suffering from it. And so my own, I made that direct relationship, and so I think immediately I knew that there was more to be done, and I knew I could, this wasn't necessarily a technical job and then I'd move on a technical job. I just felt that was the space I wanted to stay in if I could use what I'd learned to make things better for people.
And how are you feeling in that moment? Is it a light bulb moment? Is it exciting? Yeah, what's going on for you?
There's a, I wouldn't say it's certainly light bulb in terms of, I think it was more a desperation myself as we've got to do something about this. The initial thoughts are the health services, controversially falling apart, people are waiting. Well, and then it was kind of, well, actually, I can't change that. I can't change the politics, but I can fix this machine if they just let me in. So there's a whole mix of feelings from frustration of just let me get past the bureaucracy and the admin and get in and fix it. And these people can be, some of these people can be treated. And then there was the other sort of, I think what occurred to me was, what I realized in the short term after that was I needed to be doing more than just engineering. If I wanted to make changes that I just felt that we could do. But to your point, I think it's, the dots probably appeared, but the dots moved from a dotted line to a straight line as I reflect on that point in time. It certainly motivated me, and my motivations changed, and I kind of felt I'd worked hard to build all my technical skills, but they weren't necessarily the things that would get me and my. But it sounds very saintly. Please don't think that's. But to get, for me to be able to help more people, I needed to do more than just engineering, I felt.
Yeah, and then just think, like, linking it back to what you said earlier in the conversation around, was it fixing something or actually providing a service? And I suppose that ties in quite nicely here. And if the service is keeping people alive, then there's obviously more to it. And at that point, were you aware of medical devices as an industry? What was your exposure other than what you just kind of gone through?
It wasn't at all. As far as I was concerned, it was that X-ray set could have been in a radiotherapy department. It could have been X-raying diamonds. It could have been X-raying baby foods. It could have been doing a myriad of things. I was very, as you can perhaps pick out from what I've said previously, very technology driven, and I think that moment really moved that technology into that application, into that medical application, into that whole different ballpark for me.
And is it Extrella? Is that how you say it? Was that the company?
It was Gourmet Medical, and
Okay.
I was employee number 4 there. We were spinning out of an industrial company, and we actually, a couple of years later, actually had an MBO, and that's where Extral was formed.
Yeah, I think that's the first time I spoke to you. When I was probably like 6 weeks into my career as a recruiter. Yeah.
Not long ago then.
No, not long ago. So thinking about this pivotal moment then, how has that influenced your career in MedTech since then?
Well, I think looking back, it feels like overnight. But I think one of the things I realised, and I was 30 at that point, and I felt I was going to have to learn fast. I knew I needed to get more involved in a broader parts of the business. The things like product improvements, evolution, service delivery, scaling. How do we get from a company doing 5 or 6 systems a year to somebody that will get systems out faster and quicker? And that sort of, I think that's what gradually moved me across to operations. And I had to, coming back to your point earlier, I didn't know a lot about the medtech world. I had to read a lot, devour papers, went to networking events, went to meetings on site, tried to engage with peers that were in other companies. I just consumed as much as I could to learn what I can and to carry over. And I think that was, as I say, the technology almost got left behind in terms of how do we create this whole organization, this whole system to make it work.
And what would you say is the biggest takeaway lesson from that point in your life?
Good question. It's really the big takeaway from me, or I think, was it a takeaway or was it a revelation to me? I think the biggest revelation, and I'm sorry if it's not answering the direct question, was that everything I thought was really important to that point, all of a sudden was only the technical side, the engineering, was only a really small part of the big picture, the big puzzle. And I think the thing I took away from it was the need to broaden my view of what was what the opportunities were, but also what were, what needed to happen within that whole ecosystem to for things to be better.
Yeah.
I think there's an example of just staying curious, and then that period informing a lot of the decisions that you made since then, whether that was career moves or when to leave a company and move on to the next. Because the position you've ended up in now, CEO of your second MedTech business now after Oxonics. Um,
Um, this is number 4 now,
Number
actually.
four.
Yeah.
I need to look at your
So-
LinkedIn profile again. Um, but operating in what is a very academic world, and people that are spinning these companies out with a very scientific background or a very technical background, and through your career, it's a slightly different way into the industry, but you're now operating that level. Just interested to understand, has there ever been any times of imposter syndrome through your career?
oh, massively, yeah. When I think back to sort of motivations and needing to learn, I've spent a lot of time out of my comfort zone, sitting with people as you sort of allude to there. In meetings with medical physicists, and at the time PFI was big. PFI was becoming a big thing, so lots of money was being spent on hospitals. So I'd sit at a meeting, there'd be medical physicists, there'd be commercial people, there'd be representatives from your Philips, your Varians, your Siemens, and then little old me who was just pretending to be in the medtech world, who was a good engineer pretending to be in the medtech world. Yeah, that imposter syndrome was a massive thing. Yeah, and I think it really tested. I think it tests everybody's resolve. Convincing yourself that you deserve a place at that table.
Hmm. So now with the experience of 4 CEO roles, um, if you were to look at others that were earlier in their career, maybe feeling that imposter syndrome, but you reflect on your profile now, people don't like giving themselves praise, but like what do you bring to the table? What do you really see as your strengths?
I think people, when I've sought out feedback, people say that ability to kind of remain calm, step back, and look at a whole picture. And I kind of link some of this back to that growing up in engineering, and spot things that are wrong and be able to work with people to fix it. And that's probably sounds very, very vague, but I think the process of fixing a radar system and the fixing a broken down program, or implementing, installing equipment, or installing a regulatory quality system, the principles are all the same. And I think what I bring is that sort of calm approach, that step back, and let's understand how all the pieces fit together. And then, of course, hindsight and experience is what grey hair is hard won. Having seen, you know, there's only so many books you can read before you can, before the plots become similar. So I think it's a mix of that ability to identify the issues and the experience to plug those gaps. And I think that's what's really stood me in good stead.
Yeah, almost that calmness has come through experience now. Um, but is there anything that you specifically work on day to day in business or outside just to keep that level of calmness? Like what sort of habits do you have daily?
You mean the sort of non-work related?
Both, yeah. I would say
Yeah.
that my my morning routine personally with the gym and everything sets me up for a calm day at work. But
Got
just
you.
what are your daily habits?
Yeah, so I've always, since leaving the forces, and I've kind of recognised that health and fitness and your own time is really important in sort of just getting yourself out of that space, clearing your head, and then going back into it. And over the years, I've sort of thrown myself into many things. It's always been, I can, if I think back now, many years ago now, I took up martial arts, and I throw myself into these things. So I ended up, teaching, doing a couple of black belts, and now I moved on to cycling. And then it wasn't just riding around the street; it's doing, 50 and 100 mile events. And then decided I was going to run, so I'm going to do a marathon. So I've always kind of recognized that I needed to have some me time and some fitness. But it's all if I'm not working towards a purpose or a goal, then it just falls apart. So these days, things are a lot calmer. I go to the gym. Actually, I haven't turned into a hippie, but I I'm well aware of mindfulness and spending time just kind of reflecting. And then recently, if I won't turn my camera around, but this room's kind of full of guitars, tried to kind of pick up the guitar and learn something new. So it's just having something that's completely removed from work and completely absorbs you to take your mind off, off what's bothering you at the time.
I've read something actually that was advice for, I guess it was pitched to me because of my age, but as you're approaching your 40s, it said the advice was to try a new sport because you'd be starting from zero and you can only improve on that. Whereas if you've been running your entire life, as you go into your 40s, you'll still be comparing your times to when you were 20 or when you're in your 30s, and that's a downward trajectory for a lot of people. But then separate to that, pick up a hobby just for the joy of it. So the guitar is a perfect example there. Like you want to get better at it, but it is just for the pure joy that is detached from work. It's detached from any sort of targets or competitiveness. Um, I, that's what I need to find. I need to find something like that.
I think one of the other things that, Duncan, that come from this is I've sort of, if we come back to, sitting in meetings with people much smarter and much more experienced than me, you spend a lot of time out of your comfort zone, and it's not a nice place to be. Those chemicals in your stomach sending messages to your brain and whatever. It's not a nice place to be. And rather than avoid it, I think what I learned over the years was to kind of put yourself out there more often. That's not just professionally, but personally. So, turn up at that martial arts class and look around and think, everybody's better than me. On that bike, everybody's faster. The guitar, I'm 3 lessons in, but tonight I'm going to a jam session with a group of these students in a
Mm,
recording studio, and I'll be way out of my depth and I'll be terrible.
mm,
But I've almost, I wouldn't say become addicted, but I've almost seek out that sickly feeling in your stomach to get out of your comfort zone, because the comfort zone changes, you get used to dealing with it, and when you bring that back into work, things are a lot less daunting. We all have setbacks in business. Certifications don't go well, or contracts don't go, and I think learning to deal with those physical effects just completely reframes where you are to address the problem. Does that make sense?
yeah, I think it's what is it? Embarrassment is a underexplored emotion. But just be crap at something for a bit because that's how you're going to get better. Put yourself in environments where it's going to test you. Put yourself out your comfort zone. So taking that back into business then as a CEO, because you mentioned mindfulness, and something that we like to talk about on the podcast is managing your mental health. And as a leader of organizations, that can quite commonly be quite a lonely role, particularly with things like fundraisers. You feel responsible for the livelihoods of your people. So firstly, how do you manage your mental health? And then I want to talk about how you've created a culture within your organizations.
Um, so I'd love to say that I was all over mental health, and it's not an issue. And again, without sounding like a dinosaur, a lot of my working career, mental health either wasn't recognised or wasn't accepted, or frankly was an issue that you had to deal with. It's nothing to do with it. So I think it's probably only the last 10 years that I've started to think about these sort of things. And of course, you reflect back and you can see times in the past where we talk about comfort zone and imposter syndrome. Was it more to it, and there were mental health challenges? But certainly, if I think about those days at Goldman Extra building the business, a lot of stress, a lot of pressure, and my traditional, I dealt with it in the traditionally what we know to be wrong way now of just working harder, spending more time on it, and trying to get it done, and I'll relax or have a break afterwards. I'm far more aware now, far happier to kind of step back. Sure, I still have to put in 18-hour days occasionally, but that really is an exception rather than the norm. And I've kind of, again, more cliches, but I've learned that working smarter is actually often a better solution than working harder. Stopping when it gets to a certain point on the clock, going away and thinking about it, getting someone else to do it. Using the tools. That making time for myself has really become important. I became a granddad for the first time 2 years ago, and now there's this little toddler who there is nothing more rewarding than, or incentivizing almost, to say, well, actually, that is a problem. It's doing my head in, so I'm going to go play with him, or go spend some time up there. So I wouldn't say I do anything specific, other than those hobbies I've got. But I just recognise when it's time to flip the lid on the laptop and walk away.
Yeah, even that, it's doing that with intention.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And if we're to look ahead to the future, what's in store for you personally and professionally? There may be the same thing. What comes to mind?
Well, I think from a personal level, at Charco we're working through to get MDR, and my aim is really to get this product out there and do the whole scaling and find new territories, etc., so that we can actually, coming back to my much earlier point, we can help just not a handful of people, but help far more people across the globe. To do that obviously requires building the business. So I'm going to need to continue learning every day. But late 50s now, I think there are so many advantages to age. Hindsight and experience make valuable tools. So as I say, I recognise now working smarter often beats working harder. So we'll work hard, we'll work smart, we'll complete our transition, and we'll get the device out there. Ultimately, there'll be an exit, and at some point there'll be a more appropriate person to take the reins of the company than me. I recognise that, but I also recognise that it's part of the cycle of life. And at the time that happens, I hope that I can take all the white hair and wisdom and help somebody else, another company that needs to go through the same journey to get out there and help even more people. So that's really the two sort of professional and personal threads that I'm looking to.
Yeah, and thinking more broadly about the industry that we all work in, what excites you most about MedTech?
Well, what I've found, and I'm sure if I'd gone into another industry, I would have seen the same thing. But I think the standout here is the number of amazingly talented people doing incredibly smart things. And I think this industry becomes more exciting every day because the boundaries are just disappearing. If we think about brain interfaces and stem cell modification, things that were science fiction become reality almost daily. And of course, I'm biased, but neurotech and non-invasive devices, the potential to solve problems that are really causing, stopping people, in our case, stopping people walking, stopping people mobilizing, to take relatively simple solutions in terms of how they implement them and change their lives. That is just what makes this whole industry exciting. And again, without dragging the tone down, right now my dad has throat cancer and he's genuinely fighting for his life. So I guess this is really poignant. So because he started me on this whole engineering journey, and this battle against cancer sort of fueled my journey through Gourmet, through medical, through oxonics, and it feels like those two worlds are coming together. But the upside here is the advances from all of those things we just spoke about, advances in technology and what we know, means he has a far greater chance of beating it than the neighbour I told you about 40 years ago. And that's really what makes this industry worth being in.
Yeah. Yeah, completely agree. Having recruited into this industry for 13 years, I don't know whether we would have the longevity that we have had recruiting into other industries. That we're just, very grateful to be a part of it from the outside looking in, and the partnerships that we've got with incredible businesses. And yours is just another example of a successful career in a rewarding industry. But plenty more to come by the sounds of it.
I hope so. I think the key point you made earlier is it wasn't a map that was laid out from the start, just as yours wasn't. I think it's a journey. You have to enjoy the journey as well as the results, don't you?
Yeah, and you can't plan too much ahead, because it is those moments that you just have to take those opportunities where presented. You need to make sure you're still putting yourself into environments where those introductions or chance moments happen. Otherwise, you can overplan.
Yeah.
But if you were to summarize a key lesson from your journey, so to anyone that is listening to this story and has made it this far, what is the one lesson that you would leave them with?
So I would say, personally, I've always been hungry to learn more. I stood at my dad doing work, going to events, and in my own case, maybe that's being driven by the need to be as good as my dad and my granddad, because I would grow up with people saying, "Oh, if you're half as good as them, you'll be great." Maybe it's driven by imposter syndrome and the feeling of earning your place at the table. And to a degree, that imposter syndrome, your past shapes your mindset, and it absolutely matters. But it doesn't define who you are, and I think how you process and respond to your experiences you do. So if I were giving a lesson to my younger self, I'd say never stop learning and have faith you can do it. And it's not easy, is it? Because when you're going through tough times, your brain and the pit of your stomach is telling you you don't want to do it. But I always keep in mind, those two famous phrases that I can't attribute to anyone here, that you become what you think. And if you think you succeed or you think you'll fail, you're probably right. So for me, the takeaway is mindset. Without that mindset that you can do and you're going to do it and you belong there, then it's pretty tough to get there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very
It's kind of
relevant.
linking into is that saying it's like your body goes where your mind takes it, essentially.
Yeah, I'd say that.
Yeah, very relevant for some of the conversations me and Nathan have been having recently.
Yeah.
I can imagine.
But no, really appreciate you you joining us today and sharing your stories. So we'd like to just invite our listeners to reflect on their own stories, and if you feel like you've got a story to tell, then please reach out to myself and Nathan. In the meantime, please like and subscribe across our channels, and we'll be back with another episode very soon. But again, thank you very much, Andrew.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Thanks, Andrew.
Okay, all the best, everyone.